Good morning, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the conference so far. I would like to introduce this morning Dr. Richard O'Neill, who's giving the plenary this morning. Dr. Richard O'Neill is the chief economist at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Before that, he was the chief economist and director of the Office of Economic Policy, the director of the Commission's Office of Pipeline and Producer Regulation. His work has focused on open access, restructuring, competition, performance-based incentive regulation, and market design. Earlier on in his career, he was the faculty at Louisiana State University with the Computer Science Group and University of Maryland with the Business School, where he taught and did research in computer science and applied mathematics, operations research, and statistics. His published work has appeared in applied mathematics, optimization, operations research, management science, computer science, energy, electrical engineering, economics, and law. He has worked with several countries, states, the World Bank, energy and computer companies to develop mathematical software, energy modeling, forecasting, regulation, privatization, restructuring, and market design. So we are very lucky to have him here to give the plenary this morning. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard O'Neill.
Good morning, and thank you for coming. And I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me. If you're just getting here, I'm not Mark Little. But I will try to stick to the topic that he was supposed to address, and that is the smart grid or the smart markets. It's a standard catchword now in Washington, D.C. And in some sense, I would prefer smarter markets because it's not... Our markets are not dumb today, but they can get a lot better. What I'm going to try to do is give you what I believe we see, and when I say we, if you look at the bottom of the slide over there, I don't speak for the Commission. Turns out that even the commissioners don't speak for the Commission because they operate by majority vote. How generally we view the smart grid, what it means in a little bit more detail, and hopefully what operations research and management scientists can do to contribute to this paradigm change that's taking place in Washington. As a warm-up, things evolve, things change, paradigms shift over time. And today I've chosen the lessons we've learned from ether. Aristotle, quite some time ago, proved, I put that in quotes, that there was no such thing as voids, and then argued that there was something called ether that filled all the voids. 1,000 or so years later, the medieval church adopts Aristotle's view as canon law and starts punishing people who would express contrary views. And for quite some time, if you look at the history of mathematics, arguably this retarded the development of zero. And zero is a very important concept in mathematics because you can't do the calculus without it, and there's a lot of other things. Once these paradigms get embedded in the religious or political psyche, they're often hard to discharge. In 1865, Maxwell comes along with his famous equations, publicly believing in ether, but you couldn't find it in any of his equations. In 1887, Michelson-Morley's experiment essentially cast doubt on ether. And then for most of the 20th century, ether sort of gradually disappears from science. It wasn't like Pluto that was voted off by a group of astronomers. It just simply disappears. And the fascinating thing is that if you look at the concepts of ether, they could be reappearing, and we call them today dark matter or dark energy, so things can come full cycle. Now, moving to the sort of the paradigm that we were going to talk about today, and that is electricity. And electricity markets got started in the 19th century. Fierce competition between Edison and Westinghouse. Edison would electrocute dogs to demonstrate how dangerous alternating current was. Could have been executed by direct current also, but it was a very fierce competitive market. Westinghouse won the right to build an AC line from Niagara Falls to Buffalo, and the rest is history. We built the transmission system on alternating current power. Then, in the early 20th century, Sam Insull, who was formerly Thomas Edison's secretary, today he would be senior vice president for finance, moves to Chicago, makes a huge investment in electric generation, and then technology comes along and makes his existing fleet technologically obsolete. So he's going to lose the value of his investment to the next round of technology. But Sam wasn't a dumb guy. He went to the state commissions and he said, I don't want to earn excessive profits. I only want to get my cost back on my investment. So I will agree to recover no more than my costs plus a modest return, but you have to give me a monopoly franchise. Now, was he giving very much up? No. As a matter of fact, he was protecting himself against the competition that he saw coming down the road and what others didn't. But Sam's franchise became somewhat of a compelling idea, and the franchise monopoly was essentially the paradigm by which we developed through most of the 20th century. Towards the end of the 20th century, some academics and others started to question the idea of whether or not there was a monopoly paradigm, whether or not whether the paradigm was just a bad idea. And the paradigm exists because there was a monopoly franchise, not because there was anything natural about these economies of scale. There was a law, essentially, that said only one entity could build generation, transmission, and distribution in a given geographic area. So it wasn't like this was something that had naturally evolved. It was a legal franchise. And so at the end of the 20th century, the idea that that this was really a natural monopoly starts to disappear, and competition arises. And I won't go into the details, but independent generators started to form, generators that weren't affiliated with transmission or vertically integrated utilities. And we started a new paradigm, and that was this competition cooperation balance. And now, especially with climate change and other issues, other environmental issues, we have what I would call locationally challenged generation, and that is wind, solar, and hydro, because you can't deliver the fuel to the power plant. You have to build the power plant where the fuel is, the fuel being wind, solar, or hydro. And it turns out that the best wind is where nobody lives and nobody works. North Dakota and South Dakota have probably the best wind in the United States, and there's virtually nobody living there. The other thing that we're starting to try to understand is the ideas of where batteries and where demand response fit into these market designs. Now, we'll get into a little bit more of that. But batteries are a new construct. And if you believe in electric cars, you're going to see a lot more batteries plugging themselves into the grid and charging and potentially discharging, depending on the prices, and becoming market participants in the grid. So, what has happened in a large part of the United States is we've created something called an independent system operator, whose job essentially is to operate very large electricity markets, and I'll describe them in a second. But when you look at the United States as a whole, you have over 17,000 generators. You have 160,000 miles of high voltage transmission. You have a bunch of reliability rules that call for redundancy. And once you have redundancy, the idea of competition sort of becomes easier. Millions of interconnected end users who are purchasing this power. But in some cases, you have what we call load and generation pockets, that is, places where there's not enough transmission to actually make markets work, and so consequently, in these areas, there's still a fairly large concentration and there's market power. Now, ISO markets. This is a rather new phenomenon. ISOs only got started in the 90s. If you look at this from an OR point of view, the ISO market design is a competitive game embedded in a cooperative game. That is to say that the ISO makes a bunch of market rules, and the market rules come out of committee discussions of the market participants. Then the ISO submits the market rules to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission either accepts them or modifies them. And the idea is to essentially set up a structure for a competitive game. But if you look at the process from the very beginning, it looks a lot like a cooperative game until you get to getting the rules straight, and then it becomes a competitive game. Now, in all this process of changing the paradigm, you have this monopoly, franchise monopoly shadow that sits on the market. It hasn't completely gone away, and so consequently, there are some interesting things that the old paradigm sort of happens from time to time and sort of mucks things up. This is a picture of the existing ISOs in the United States and in Canada. I won't go into any detail. The white space is places where there isn't an ISO. You'll notice that the western U.S., with the exception of California, isn't in an ISO, and most of the South is not in an ISO. Is this because there's something structurally different? No. The reason why there's not ISOs in these white areas is political, not economic, and not structural. Now, what's the target in this electric market? How big is electricity? Well, if you look at electricity in the U.S. Or worldwide, the target is about $10 to the $12 a year. That's a lot of money. And if you can get 1% better, if you can save 1% cost, or if you can get a 1% better dispatch, you're talking about savings in the order of magnitude of $10 billion a year. So the target is certainly rich. As I hope I can convince you by the end of this talk, that there is a lot that this audience can actually do to help reach those targets. Now, as we said in the beginning, we're talking about yet another paradigm change to these smart markets. Well, what are smart markets? Well, it turns out that it's just about everything is going to get smarter. The generators are going to get smarter, the transmission lines are going to get smarter, the communications are going to get smarter, the software and the hardware is going to get smarter. Well, what does all this mean? Well, for example, if you have an appliance, let's say a refrigerator or a dishwasher, or let's say some appliance that you're going to buy in the near future, your refrigerator is going to have a little chip in it. And the chip is going to detect a frequency excursion from 60 hertz and will respond to that frequency excursion by shutting itself down and hopefully bringing the frequency back to 60. Now, you'll never notice it because it'll shut down and start itself back up so quickly that you'll hardly ever notice it, and your food will not notice it, but it will actually help manage the grid. There may be your appliances, for example, your dishwasher may be set not to go on until after the prices get low. And your plug-in hybrid may actually have a wireless internet connection where it goes to the local ISO, finds out what the price is, and decides whether or not to charge. Or it comes home at night and you turn a switch or you set a timer that says to the ISO, I want this battery charged to this level by 6 o'clock in the morning. Would you figure out how to do it cheaply for me? And the only thing the person has to do is sort of say when they're going to drive the car out of the parking, out of its garage or wherever it's parked around the house. And of course, all of you folks who've come to this meeting from afar, drove to the airport, park your car at the airport. Now, in the future, you'll plug it in, and you'll tell the parking lot that you're going to be there for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And the parking lot then will tell the ISO, and the ISO says, here's a storage device. And I can charge it and discharge it when the marginal costs get high. I can actually discharge it. And when the marginal costs get low, I can charge it. And so when you come back, instead of having to pay the parking fee, they may write you a check. Now, if you talk to Ramteen, he'll give you all kinds of caveats about the battery manufacturers being nervous or the car owners not wanting you to do this. But, those are details. So, now, we have all of these new appliances that are giving off all kinds of information, absorbing all kinds of information, but what we have to do is process it and make this information useful. For example, if I don't have a way to communicate a price to this battery that's sitting in my garage, I can't optimally charge it. And if I have a lot of wind on the system that is not a constant source of energy, sometimes it's blowing, sometimes it's not, I need to communicate in a way that says the wind is blowing, the marginal cost of electricity is down, charge. Or vice versa, the wind isn't blowing, the marginal cost of electricity is such and such, discharge. Now, of course, you have to turn the control over to the ISO. There's not going to be any big brother coming in and say you have to do this, but natural economic incentives are going to say it's a good idea, and most people will hopefully take advantage of it. And so we're going to have to coordinate a whole lot of more stochastic issues, like when the wind is going to blow and when it's not. Solar only generates when the sun is hot. That's good news because that's usually when the prices are really high. And coordinate these batteries and demand response, which has traditionally not been a part of these markets. And as one of FERC's strategic goals for the next 5 years is to promote efficiency through better software and better optimization software, because what this electric system is very large markets. Now, what about the electric network? I mean, obviously, everybody here knows there's an electric network. Now, if you're a layperson, the electric network looks like the picture in the upper left-hand corner. If you're an electrical engineer, that network looks like a bunch of capacitors, resistors, inductors. And if you go to the down a little bit, you'll see the equations that represent the real and reactive power going across that transmission line. And you'll notice that there's quadratic terms and sines and cosines. And if we're going to try to optimize something that has equations with quadratic terms and sines and cosines, that presents a challenge. Well, we can't solve that problem, or we can't solve it on a large scale, so what we do is we approximate it. And the approximation is, if you can see it, the last line. And the market models essentially take the AC system, pretends it's a direct current system, and in essence linearize the equations so that we can employ things like linear programming and mixed integer programming to solve the problem. But in the process, we've dropped out reactive power. Now, reactive power is a strange thing. If you look at those equations, you realize that the AC electricity is explained by complex numbers, and reactive power happens to be the equivalent of the imaginary part of a complex number, and so a lot of people think it's just an imaginary construct. Who gave the term imaginary to the pair that exists as a complex number probably did a disservice to the electric industry, because it's not imaginary. You can measure it, and you can do, it causes problems. It'll heat things up and all that kind of other stuff. But we drop it out in the market model because we can't solve it. Now, it turns out that that's not a bad approximation. I'm not sure, how bad it is, but it's not too bad. Now, because the electricity market is so complicated, people try to explain it by analogy. One of the current fashionable, and I've just listed some analogies, and I'm not going to go through all of these because it would take the rest of the time, but for example, one of the current paradigms that everybody wants to use is the highway model, because they think what we should do is pattern the upgrades and the additions and the investments to the transmission system on a national highway model where we just simply have a general tax to upgrade the system. And then there's everything from water analogies to air traffic controller to railroads to telecom. The problem is that none of these actually need complex mathematics to model them, and they don't do very well, and they always fail. And my favorite one is trying to compare the electric system to an air traffic controller. This was one of Enron's famous analogies when they didn't want anybody regulating the market. They would say, the system is like an air traffic controller. Well, if the electric system was like an air traffic controller, or the airline system, when I put my mother-in-law on a plane in Washington to visit her son, my brother-in-law in California, about a third would go through Toronto on Air Canada, a third would go to Chicago on United, and a third would go through Dallas on American, and then put it all back together again. But then you'd realize that, well, gee, this is a displacement good, and all mother-in-laws are fungible. So there's no reason I have to put my mother-in-law on the plane. I could just rent a mother-in-law in California, because nobody can tell the difference, right? I mean, mother-in-laws are mother-in-laws. Well, the trip time is pretty quick, and there's a question about how to split up the money, for the ticket. So, so we have this transmission system, and we have a bunch of generators, and we have a bunch of demand, and what we want to do is create these auction markets where the generators and the demand can bid into the system, and you can set up an optimization problem that finds the least cost dispatch, or if you're into economics, the maximum market surplus. And we do it, first of all, on a real-time basis, because the system has to be in constant balance. And so the ISO actually runs a market every 5 minutes. These lights basically are staying on with the California ISO running a 5-minute market to buy and sell electric power and to redispatch generators. And that happens in about 2/3 of the U.S. Then day ahead, well, we have a day ahead market also. Why do you have a day ahead market also? Is because generators have to be started up. And generators to be started up have a startup cost. And then once you start the generators up, you have to run them for a minimum amount of time. And then once you take them down, you have to keep them down for a minimum amount of time. Now, to an integer program, those are called up-down polytopes. And the question is, how can you efficiently solve the up-down polytopes to get the optimal solution? Or how do you get the facets of the up-down polytopes into the optimization problem? We also have capacity markets. I won't talk to them about them today. They have their own set of interesting issues. Along with all of this, we sell financial transmission rights, and these are sold also in auction markets where people bid for these transmission rights to hedge congestion, and others sell them. But we don't have enough time to go into it. The new and interesting question that has appeared on the horizon is if we have lots of wind potential in North Dakota and virtually nobody living there, and all the people living on the coasts, what do we do? And then, of course, the people living on the coasts, at least on the East Coast, have said, oh, we're going to build the wind offshore because that's where we want our wind to be. And the question then sort of occurs is, how do we do this balance of competition and cooperation? How do you decide where to build the next generation of transmission lines? Even if you want to say, we want this much wind in our market, which may actually happen, it's called a renewable portfolio standard, the question becomes, how do you plan the transmission system and allow a decent amount of competition at the same time? This is a tough problem. And as you'll see, it's a very complex optimization problem. Also, because the startup cost and the minimum uptowns and the minimum uptimes, minimum downtimes, and also I didn't mention that most of these generators have a minimum level at which they have to operate at, makes this market problem non-convex. That is to say that it doesn't fit your normal first semester economics where you drew supply and demand curves and you saw a market clearing price. You can get linear prices out of this system from the dual variables in the optimization problem, but they don't tell the whole story, because oftentimes in a convex world, the dual variables will compensate people for committing themselves to the market. In a non-convex world, the linear prices may not be enough to cover the bid costs, and so consequently we have to do things. We've invented a term called uplift, which is essentially saying if you don't get paid enough through the linear prices, we'll find a way to at least make you whole. There's been some more sophisticated settlement proposals, but the biggest problem with more sophisticated proposals is the people who don't understand the sophistication of cooperative game theory, like the Shapley value, are very leery of those types of calculations. And also, it would be a practical impossibility to actually calculate something like a Shapley value. Okay, so what does the future look like? Well, the smarter markets what we want to have is more of the demand side. We want you people to be bidding into these markets. Or we want your smart appliances to be bidding into these markets. You can just of course, everybody in this room could program their appliances and walk away, but maybe not everybody. We want smarter hardware. For example, we want new devices where we can vary the impedance in these markets so that we can get more out of the transmission system. We want better approximations. As I told you before, this world lives in approximations. And the better you can do it, the more efficiency you can get at. The better you can get these approximations, the more efficiency you can generate. Also, we want to make use of flexibility and thermal constraints. None of the thermal constraints in this system are hard, yet most of the models actually assume them to be hard. You can relax thermal constraints for short periods of time without doing any damage to the equipment, and sometimes it's very important to be able to do that. But the important thing is that you don't want that the damage essentially comes in a cumulative fashion. That is to say, if you just run it a little hot for a long period of time, eventually you're going to cause a problem. Or if you run it real hot for a short period of time, you may cause a problem. And it's that interaction that isn't captured by these market designs. Also, another thing that I'm going to talk about is transmission switching. It turns out that by taking elements out of the transmission system, you can actually improve the performance of the system. And that can be a very promising area also. So all in all, these markets, we are talking about 10 to the 5th nodes, 10 to the 5th transmission constraints, and 10 to the 4th binary variables. Plus, if you did it in its full bloom, the constraint set has these cosine, sines, and quadratic terms. So it's not an easy problem to solve, but the potential is there. There's a potential for saving through better modeling 10 to 30% and through smarter appliances. Okay, end-use markets. What's the problem? Well, you get a bill once a month, and your meter, how many people have smart meters in here? How many know that they have smart meters? Oh, there's one. Okay. Well, actually, if you live in California, you're getting a smart meter. So just wait. I know you can't wait, but everybody's seen the meters that most people have. Those meters are read once a month. So it doesn't matter if you're consuming lots of power when the prices are very high or when the prices are very low. That meter doesn't know, because all that meter knows is what your consumption was at the beginning of the month, and then at the end of the month it gets read, and that's it. The information about how much you consumed when it was very hot disappears. And so it's very common to have retail prices less than $100 a megawatt hour, and wholesale prices up around $1,000 a megawatt hour. As a matter of fact, this happened in California, and 2 of the large utilities went structurally bankrupt buying power at $1,000 and selling it for $100. And so the idea here is to get the demand side of the market into the market through smart appliances. The appliances that I was telling you about before, like the plug-in hybrids, like programming your dishwasher not to turn on until midnight or 2 a.m. in the morning, same thing for your dryer, changing your thermostat settings in ways that don't change your overall comfort level. I mean, you can do these things in ways that don't require huge sacrifices. It simply says that the system has to be managed better. And the hope is that if, in fact, you can communicate, and certainly all the technology is here today, over the internet with the ISO, and it can tell you what the prices are going to be for the next day or the next hour, it's not a difficult problem to program your appliances to make decisions on your behalf that minimize your costs of operating and your cost in general. Now, the problem is that if we actually try to incorporate a lot of this stuff into the market, the market problem that we have to solve gets much, much larger. And the problem for the demand side is slightly different than the problem for the supply side. For example, an industrial company may want to ask the question, should I run a second or third shift? Which essentially says I have to make a decision over a longer period of time, which essentially is, once again, a non-convex decision, an integer decision, to either start my shift or not. And so we're now going to throw a whole bunch of additional integer variables into our optimization problem. So here's the mixed integer program. Now, for those of us who were around in the 70s, mixed integer programming was banned from industrial applications. It looked like it was really promising. They turn the computers on, go home for the weekend, come back, nothing. So for most industrial applications, integer programming went down the tubes. But it's made a resurgence. This simple paradigm can be used to model both the non-convexities in the system, some interactions that we don't model today, transmission switching, and investment decisions. Now, the good news is that over the last 30 years, we've improved the performance of integer programming, mixed integer programming, by 10 to the 7th, which means that a problem 30 years ago that would have taken 10 years to solve now takes 5 minutes. And as an example of that, and this was a conference that we were at, and we gave this unit commitment problem to Bob Bixby, and he just simply happened to have CPLEX on his machine, and so, or every version of CPLEX, and he overnight ran this problem to demonstrate how the different versions of CPLEX over with the years corresponding to their issuance solved this problem. And you can see that over a 10-year period, essentially the software itself is solving the problem essentially 100 times faster. And that's on the same hardware. I mean, it's not including the hardware improvements. So there's promise. To get some of these problems that we see coming on, we need probably at least 10 to the 6th in the next decade or so improvement again. And I'm depending on you folks to get there. Actually, as a result of the conference that we had in 1999, where we were trying to convince people that it was time to look at mixed integer programming, some of the ISOs, and the ISOs are listed on the right-hand column, actually moved their market software to MIP. And they did nothing more than change out the algorithms, and most of the algorithms were either simple linear programs that people finessed or Lagrangian relaxation, which oftentimes didn't even get you a feasible solution. PJM estimates that it's saving over $200 million a year in dispatch costs by switching to mixed integer programming. The rest of these I don't have statistics on, but if PJM is any guide, the savings could be easily in the $1 billion a year range. And this is simply using mixed integer programming to solve the problem that we used to present to it, to the Lagrangian relaxation. And it's easy for you to say. The Lagrangian relaxation was actually affected the market design because it couldn't solve certain types of configurations. And let me give you an example. There's a technology called combined cycle combustion turbines. There's a picture of it up in the corner. In essence, what it is a series of turbines that generate electricity, give off heat. The heat can be used to make steam, and the steam can then be turned into electricity. But each one of these devices has a minimum operating level, a maximum operating level, and a startup cost. And when you can get them all running together, you can actually, the steam unit doesn't cost you anything. It's simply taking the waste heat of the turbines and reconverting it into electricity. But you have to get to a point where you can start up the steam turbine. The lower graph is a picture of that unit's marginal costs. Notice that there are gaps. In other words, there are places in the dispatch where you can't actually dispatch these units. There's essentially step functions that go back up and down. And eventually, you get to a point where the marginal cost curve is monotonically increasing. Well, that's where life is easy to solve. And so what we do is, instead of actually modeling all of the other possibilities, we start the problem with a lower bound where the function becomes monotonically increasing, and we call it the eco-min. And it's the eco-min because it's hard to solve the problem if you don't have an eco-min. So what does this mean? Well, if you put that red line, I fashioned the red line to be a residual demand curve. If you look at, if that unit faces that residual demand curve, you find that the problem has 5 local optima. And if you look below there, you look at the actual surplus in the market for the 5 local optima, and you find out that the one with the optimal surplus, the dispatch configuration with the optimal surplus, actually doesn't exist if you start the process at the eco-min. In other words, it's excluded. Now, admittedly, I trumped up this example, but it's an example to show you that we're still trying to get this problem into a better form of approximations, and the reason we did this is because the market wouldn't solve the full problem. Well, once again, PJM actually has put this new stuff into their market design, and although the owners of the generators are fearful of actually using this because they're not sure that they're going to make enough money if they actually get dispatched at the lower ranges of the output, but it is issues like this, especially if you're expecting a lot of wind to come on the system, where you may need the flexibility of dispatch that's really available, but the algorithms can't handle. Lastly, transmission switching. Anybody who's actually ventured into electricity markets starts off with a 3-node model with equal impedances and starts doing some hand calculations of how the market clears. And eventually, for most of these models, you look at it, and if you're really paying attention, you can say, if I take this transmission line out of that network, I can actually improve the surplus in the market. And you call up the guy who gave you the example, and you say, if I take that out, I can improve the surplus. And he says, you can't take the line out. And you say, why? He says, well, it screws up the example. And this is something that I observed and essentially has been bugging me ever since. And then I had the luck of having some very industrious PhD students in operations research working for us at FERC, and I gave them the problem, thinking that maybe we could get 1 or 2% or 3% by transmission switching. We took the examples, standard literature test problems, and we got first Problem out of the box, we get 25% savings in dispatch costs by just re-optimizing the topology of the network. Some of the referees didn't believe that we could actually, that this was possible. And then they complained that we weren't N-1 reliable. N-1 reliability says that the electric system has to survive the loss of any unit in the system. So if you have a large transmission line and it goes down, the system has to stay up. If you have a large nuclear plant and it goes down, you have to have enough generation online to essentially absorb the fact that that line goes down. So we did N-1 reliability, and we still got 16%. And by the way, when you do N-1 reliability in this context, you don't have to finesse the reserves. You actually get the right reserves distribution across the system. We then found an ISO New England network, and we got 15% savings, which in ISO New England would be $500 million a year. Now, there's a downside here. How long does it take, Corey? Well, if you do this in the day-ahead market, it only currently takes, a couple days to solve. Now, I consider that proof of concept. We're not there yet, but, if you can solve this problem faster, you can do, the biggest problem with software is that you can't make a lot of money off the software because we don't have a way to pay you for the, people come to me all the time and say, oh, if I develop this algorithm, can I have 1% of the savings? And I don't know how to tell them. We don't do that. I mean, maybe it's a good idea, but, that's something we don't do. So there's another idea. So what are we looking for in the future software? Well, we want to get a full AC power flow in the real-time market with 5-minute or less than 5-minute dispatches and look-aheads to anticipate problems because it takes time to start up units. We want a day-ahead market that's N-1, AC OPF, unit commitment with transmission switching and 15-minute scheduling. Now, the problem is right now this problem won't solve. It may solve, but it's not going to solve in the day-ahead market because the day-ahead market has to clear in about 2 or 3 hours. And these problems probably are still take 2 or 3 days to solve. But if you can find the facets of the up-down polytope, then you're probably closer to getting this problem solved. That leaves the investment planning model. Now, you can conceptualize this problem as an extension of the day-ahead market problem where startup and switching now have investment costs associated with them. So a startup of a generator is actually building a generator and incurring capital costs, and switching a transmission line into the system becomes essentially, if it's a new line, investment. So you can think about it, but now you have a long time horizon and a lot more detail. And now you have a much bigger problem, but the good news is this is a planning model, so you can take 2 or 3 days if you need it. Okay? But what we're now facing is this problem of interfacing the idea that we like competition in generation, but we don't have a good paradigm for doing transmission investment. And transmission has network effects and all kinds of other things. So the question, and obviously transmission investments can do a lot of good things. For example, they can have substantial effect on competition. Actually, sometimes the effect is negative. They can reduce power cost in constrained areas, but they can distort and delay competitive generation because the decisions that a generator will make will be dependent on where the transmission is built and located. So the question is, there's a chicken and egg, and how do you deal with this problem? Quickly, you have to decide on a set of future scenarios. That could be a huge debate in and of itself if you're part of this climate change and lowering oil imports debate. Exactly what the future should look like or what is a big debate. Signing probabilities is probably even a bigger debate. Then you have to take transmission proposals of who wants to build what. Hopefully you will take the proposals on face value and say, this is what if you're going to offer to build me these lines at this cost, you're going to build them at this cost. And then you put this into a large-scale stochastic mixed integer program and maybe go away for a month. And hope when you come back you got something better. And then, so this thing will find the investments with the highest expected net benefits. You then have to determine the beneficiaries. And then you have to allocate the cost and the transmission rights, which becomes a massively large cooperative game. Now, certainly we would not, we would try to trim that whole process down because nobody would actually do, a sophisticated cooperative game. But the principles of cooperative game theory are essentially what's going to guide you here. So, but there's complicating issues. So if you believe that these additional transmission lines are going to be used to build more wind or build more solar, and that's going to help reliability. Reliability is a strange concept, and it's not clear exactly whose reliability is improved. If you believe that they're going to reduce our carbon footprint, the beneficiaries of having your carbon footprint reduced are not simply the people in the general neighborhood of the transmission line. And the other problem is that if you build a transmission line, sometimes one group's prices go up and another group's prices go down, and the group whose prices go up will not particularly like the idea of paying for the transmission line. So there's a lot of very complicated issues that have to be dealt with. Now, if you noticed along the way, we ran into a whole bunch of problems. We had nonlinear, non-convex constraint functions. We had startup cost. We had transmission switching. And so, plus we have a whole bunch of pricing issues. So there's a huge potential possibility for work in this area. And in particular, I can't think of a better audience to delve into this, because this is about nonlinear optimization, non-convex optimization, and game theory. Essentially more cooperative game theory than anything else. So there's something here, and hopefully the biggest problem in Washington is they seem to be obsessed with spending money on hardware. Hopefully we can talk the Department of Energy into spending more money on software and optimization, but that's yet to be done. And to conclude, I'd just like to cite three of my favorite quotes. One from Schumpeter, which says, "Harness the perennial gale of creative destruction." Some people don't like that, but who would like the mixed integer capabilities of MPSX 360? Well, we wouldn't be anywhere. The reason why MPSX 360 isn't around anymore is because it was creatively destroyed. That is to say, something came along better. So creative destruction is not a bad idea. It's a good idea. It's technological progress. The second one is from Einstein, which sort of has to guide these market designs because you never get it right. And he says everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And finally, Max Planck, who says that a scientific truth does not triumph by convincing, its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up familiar with it. Thank you.